सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Much as we think every day that we should talk about something that's happening in India, so much is happening in Indian politics and in many other areas within our country, something that happens overseas takes precedence. And you know what? There is no one else to blame more for this, if you could blame somebody for making news, than Xi Jinping, the Chinese strongman. Just yesterday, we had talked about the protests within China against his draconian zero COVID policy. Now, once again, we've had another global power, a global power of some stature. You may not say, you may say, oh, it's a small population, large country, etc. But you know, Canada is not a power you can just ignore. Canada is a very significant global power. So Canada also, usually very pacifist, usually very much focused on climate change, human rights, etc., does not talk about security very much. But Canada also has now come up with its Indo-Pacific strategy, a written Indo-Pacific strategy of 26 pages, much more concise than what we might have seen from other countries, particularly the US. Very concise, 26 pages in big type. I will share the entire policy with you. Please check out the link with the description of this episode of Cut the Clutter, but also tell you some highlights. Now, this by itself, you might have said, oh, it is a little bit apologetic in parts, right? It might look like that because it talks again a lot about climate change, human rights, trade, this and that. But the subtext is very clear. The subtext is about security. And in this case, in Canada's case, a lot of it is about internal security. So we'll talk about that. And what makes it even more significant is that two more things have happened at the same time. And we are connecting the dots. One, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister. Remember at Bali, both Trudeau and Sunak had quote unquote incidents with Xi Jinping. So what happened with Trudeau, we saw camera caught Xi Jinping giving him almost a public shellacking, almost like a school headmaster admonishing a mischievous student, right? That was caught on camera. At the same time, at Bali itself, a planned meeting between Rishi Sunak and Xi Jinping did not happen. It was scheduled, but did not happen. So we know that diplomats find euphemisms and excuses to cover up for what is obviously a diplomatic incident. This meeting was cancelled. Both sides, diplomats said this happened because of scheduling problems. Now, scheduling challenges for Prime Minister of Britain and the President of China, for heaven's sake, if they want to meet, they can meet. So something happened there, and we don't know who is it who was responsible for cancelling that pre-scheduled meeting. So both came back nursing their wounds, Trudeau and Rishi Sunak. And this is not personal. This is about their countries. And because if Xi Jinping treated them the way he did, that's also because he's trying to convey to them his view of their countries and their policy. So two things have happened, I told you. One, Canadians have come up with their Indo-Pacific strategy, which is significant. There's also a little section on India. I'll talk about that. But also, Rishi Sunak has made a statement. And Rishi Sunak made a speech in the financial district of London. So the key takeaway from his speech there is, golden era of relations with China is over. He's referring back to something that David Cameron, one of his predecessors from his party, had used to describe UK's relations with China. That is also something that the then Finance Minister George Osborne had said. So he's now saying that era, that golden era of relations with China is over. The exact quote from him, the operative quote, let's be clear, the so-called golden era is over, along with the naive idea that trade would lead to social and political reform. Now that is an expectation that a lot of countries had, including many people in India, that once you bring in China into the global system, China will get so committed to global stability because of its dependence on trade and its export-driven economy that China will then have a vested interest in maintaining that stability. That, Rishi Sunak is saying, as many other leaders are discovering, as India has discovered too, that is an unrealistic expectation from Xi Jinping's China. So what is the third thing that has happened? Because I said that we will connect some distant dots. The third thing is that something is emerged in Canadian media about a politician called Jagmeet Singh, Jimmy, it's a tradition in Punjab to have a second name, Jagmeet Singh, Jimmy Dhaliwal, who runs a party called NDP, New Democratic Party. It's very liberal, used to be socialist, changed its name. Now that party is important. It has 25 seats and a parliament of 338. Now by itself, it may not be too much, 25 and 338, but remember Trudeau got his third term with only 159 seats. 170 is the majority mark, so they fell short by 11. So they then leaned on Jagmeet Singh Dhaliwal's party, who has then signed an agreement with Trudeau's government, which is called, I don't know from where that terminology comes, which is called Confidence and Supply Agreement. Under this agreement, NDP is committed to supporting Trudeau's party in parliament because it's a minority government. So if there is a vote of confidence, they will support it. Also, they will not move a vote of confidence or vote for a vote of no confidence against Trudeau government. So Trudeau government depends on them. They are a very crucial element in the Trudeau government. Why are we telling you this background? We're telling you this background because just a couple of days back, Jagmeet Singh Dhaliwal was quoted in a radio interview as saying he was asked questions on the so-called Khalistan referendums in Canada, and he said he sort of made light of these, and he said, look, I believe in self-determination by everybody. If people peacefully want something, what's the harm in their trying for it? He didn't say this Khalistan referendums are wrong or that he doesn't support them or that he believes in India's integrity and unity, etc. He didn't say that. He said that, look, people can have a yearning to be free, as people say in Quebec, in Canada, or Scotland in United Kingdom. Now that is something that is bound to raise the hackles on the Indian side. This was picked up by the conservative press in Canada, and I'll share with you a story from Globe and Mail, which said that this affects Canada's relationship with India. Why is it relevant to this episode of Cut the Clutter? Because these statements have come at the same time that Canadians have come, his government has come with an Indo-Pacific strategy where India has a crucial role and where it talks glowingly of India. And the fact is that Trudeau government, after the earlier setbacks, has now been working very hard at mending its relationship with India, as is the Modi government in India. The Canadian High Commissioner, in fact, recently made a visit to Amritsar, to the Golden Temple, and there made a statement that Canada is committed to the unity and integrity of India. In this situation, when this new Indo-Pacific strategy also sees India as a crucial pillar, the last thing the Trudeau government wants is for a powerful Canadian politician to be upsetting the Indians. And that too, when this senior politician in this party happened to be crucial or critical for his government's survival. So that's how all these distant threads are connected. So Rishi Sunak first. Rishi Sunak, he was accused during the campaign for Prime Ministership. He was accused by Liz Truss, his opponent, who first became Prime Minister disastrously for a very short while and mercifully for a very short while. She had called his approach to China soft because he had refrained from calling China a threat. Liz Truss was quite happy to call China a threat. He, on the other hand, is continuing to use systemic challenge. Systemic challenge is his definition. And then he goes on to say, and I quote, "We recognize that China poses a systemic challenge to our values and interests, a challenge that gets more acute as it moves towards even greater authoritarianism." Now, if you see the Canadians' Indo-Pacific strategy, they also make some reference to it. Again, it's diplomatic language, but in this case, I think this is probably the most significant and the most explicit line in the Canadian Indo-Pacific strategy. It says, and I quote from the document, quote, "China's rise enabled by the same international rules and norms that it now increasingly disregards, has had an enormous impact on the Indo-Pacific, right? And then they go on to say, the document goes on to say, China is making large-scale investments to build economic influence, diplomatic impact, offensive military capabilities, and advanced technologies. And friendly forces in the Indo-Pacific have to find a way of countering it, and there India, of course, is among the friendly forces. Once again, why is it so significant that Rishi Sunak and Trudeau are speaking out at the same time? Because both UK, both Britain and Canada are members of the Five Eyes Alliance. So UK, Britain, New Zealand, America, Australia, they are members of the Five Eyes Alliance. India, US, Australia and Japan are members of the Quad. All of them are focused, all of them are sort of like-minded allies. They have all their specific concerns. So all of them are sharply focused with shared concerns and shared interests in the Indo-Pacific. Now Rishi Sunak, many of his party people are still not happy with him. Now where is it? He's talking about Chinese interfering in his politics, and you can see where he's coming from. That's because the Chinese sanctioned some Tory MPs, his party's MPs, for speaking out on the Uyghur issue, human rights issue in Xinjiang. So one of those MPs sanctioned by China, Duncan Smith, he's actually said that look, Rishi Sunak is still not going far enough. He has to start using the expression threat. Now again, if I go back to the Canadian document, these are, as I told you, all joined at the hip. These are very close allies. The Canadian document also talks about Chinese covert influence over their politics, their internal affairs. Remember, the issue over which Xi Jinping admonished Trudeau was that Trudeau took up with Xi Jinping in his meeting his complaints about Chinese interfering in his politics by trying to influence elections in Canada by funding some candidates friendly to the Chinese. And that was leaked, or that was revealed to the Canadian media, and Xi Jinping was complaining about it. So one central issue there is something called Chinese police stations. Now, why should you worry about Chinese police stations? You shouldn't worry about them, at least foreigners shouldn't worry about them, as long as they stay on in China. But these are not Chinese police stations in China. So this is an issue that we'll talk about in some detail, maybe in another episode of Cut the Clutter. But now it's come out that from Canada to Britain to Nigeria to many countries where Chinese have interest, they set up these clandestine, covert, quote-unquote, police stations. So basically, these are their covert cops who keep an eye on overseas Chinese who may be dissidents or who may be seen as a threat by the Xi Jinping regime. So Canada and Britain, both have had a lot of these and both are now moving. So Canada in this Indo-Pacific strategy has allocated a fair bit of money to protect itself internally, particularly from cyber espionage, other spying, etc., etc. And more money is being allocated, say, to CSIS. CSIS is Canadian Security and Intelligence Service. So CSIS and also Communication Security Establishment, CSE, that is to protect Canadians under cyber espionage. All of this is not directed at Mexicans or Americans or Indians or anybody. All of this is directed at the Chinese. That is the common thread that runs through all of this. Again, this Indo-Pacific strategy document, Canadian state very clearly, they say Canada is a Pacific nation. Of course they are. You can see the west coast of Canada, it's facing all of the Pacific. Canada is a Pacific nation. The Indo-Pacific is our neighborhood. So once again, the use of the expression Indo-Pacific and that it's our neighborhood. Then with India, they say that we share democratic and pluralistic values and traditions with India. They want to move towards quickly sealing an EPTA, or what is an early progress trade agreement, which should be a precursor to a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, or CEPA, going ahead. And then you know what? While they talk of India as a regional security partner, that's significant. So what will make my friends in Punjab very happy? They also say that Canadian government, as part of their Indo-Pacific strategy, also is looking for bolstering Canadian visa facilities in New Delhi and guess where? And Chandigarh. right? So that should bring some smiles on the faces of a lot of people up north of Delhi. So once again, the details on what they want to do with India are not a great deal. You will see that page on my screen. You will also see a graphic where they list out the extent of their dealings with India and how involved they are with India. And then they call India a growing strategic, economic, demographically important power. So India now features in Canadian security worldview as we haven't really seen, at least we haven't seen stated so clearly in the past. On China, when this Indo-Pacific strategy talks about China, I see the expression clear-eyed used more than once, I think 3 times. That's because liberal intellectuals and liberal politicians, both in Britain and in Canada, they've been saying, look, the way to deal with China is to engage more with them, also give them a larger stake in the system and global stability and global trade. That will help. Now, that is what led to some decisions on the part of everybody that were not so clear-eyed, right? You can still see some countries in the Western world which are confused. Say Germany, for example. But you can now see that at least in Anglosphere, these blinkers are now being lifted. And once again, the Canadian Indo-Pacific strategy says, I said this earlier, but now I'll give you the fuller version because we are leading to the conclusion. And I quote, China's rise enabled by the same international rules and norms that it now increasingly disregards has had an enormous impact on Indo-Pacific. China now wants to shape international order in a way to suit itself, which increasingly departs from agreed principles. It says, in areas of profound disagreement, we will challenge China, including when it comes to coercive behavior. So all of this is very significant and it's all there. Read this with what Rishi Sunak has said and you can see there's quite a bit of agreement or unanimity on this, at least among these friendly powers, all of which happen to be friendly to India. A special challenge will come for Trudeau and Canada vis-a-vis India, because whatever happens, India may worry about China, India does worry about China all the time, and there is a common shared perception with Canada and Britain and America and Australia and Japan and everybody else, South Korea, why not, on China, Indonesia, Philippines, but India is absolutely super sensitive about its internal security. Anything that looks like, or any action that looks like supporting any radical elements out of India, or that may threaten or challenge India's internal security or India's integrity or unity, will be an absolute deal breaker. The problem with Trudeau in this situation is that the ally on whom he depends so much. NDP for him is what the left front was to UPA-1. Without left front, UPA-1 could not have survived until Dr. Manmohan Singh decided to challenge the left on the nuclear deal. Once again, maybe that is too radical a comparison, but Trudeau has to worry about this element on which he depends, undermining his Indo-Pacific efforts. Because there cannot be any Indo-Pacific strategy for any of these countries without India or the Indo in it.